Mr. Portz, Steve, thanks so much for joining us today. I know that the last time we saw each other, we were in the hallways kind of packing up and into the school year. So we appreciate you taking some time out of your summer to do this podcast with us. Why don't you start off by telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in engineering as a kind of a curriculum for students?
Right, sure. I went. Well, you kind of have to go back to my college days because I was studying to be an architect, and at that time, everything was on the boards. It was manually drawing, and computers were just coming on the scene. And I had a professor say, you really ought to get into this CAD thing and computer aided design. And it was just in its infancy at that time. In fact, when we had to sign up to get into the labs, and most of the times were like 3 a.m. that you could get in there, and you could only sign up for an hour at a time. And literally these CAD stations, you walked into them. It was like a Star Trek, bridge. You were surrounded by terminals. It was a micro station or a CATIA, and there was these monitors all over the place, and you had to code in your commands. It wasn't as much visual based. Anyway, I was in a class, and one of the professors, he was my favorite professor at that time, and he stopped the class and he asked how many of us that were studying to be design engineers were interested in being teachers, and not a person raised their hand. And it was really stunning because there were probably 200 people in this arena style class, and he kind of choked up and broke down, and he said, it gets me that way to think about it. He says, I know you guys are worried about providing for your families, you want to make a good living and all that stuff. I get that. He says, but if you would consider teaching, you would never regret that a day in your life. And when he said that, it felt like he was just talking to me. And almost that day, I went and changed my major to industrial arts education. So instead of learning to draw, and I would teach students how to draw engineering drawings. And so that's kind of where I got there. So I come from a drafting background. That was my emphasis, was in wood shop and graphic arts. I'm not graphic arts, but I did graphic arts as a minor too, but just engineering drawings. And so, yeah, and that's seen me through. I started teaching wood shop in 1988 and on Merritt Island, and took over for a teacher that was retiring after 30 years. So there was quite a tradition and a reputation to fill there. And about is early 90s, this idea of technology education came out. And I don't know if you remember, Betty Castor was the commissioner of education, and she started a request for proposals, an RFP for conversion of industrial arts laboratories to technology education, which technology education was the idea of learning about all the different technologies and getting some just, basic literacy to understand, the different technologies that are coming out and the high technologies that are available. Instead of doing, wood shop, if you think about the administrations in the country at that time, there was the big .com bubble and all that stuff that was happening. And everybody thought everything was migrating to the web, and we're all going to be totally information. We're not going to do any hands-on anymore. And we basically, threw that baby out with the bathwater. It's like, okay, we're going to give China all of our menial tasks, and we're just going to become cerebral. So they basically disbanded all these wood shops and practical arts programs, nationwide. And not only that, but the worst thing was they disbanded the teacher education programs that fulfilled them. And when I had the chance to meet in Washington with the deputy director of the OSTP, I asked them this question. It was I like to put him on the spot about that, because I said, we're talking about this maker movement with 3D printing and all this stuff. And I said, basically, we've given away our capacity to make things. The idea of making things by hand has been gone. and now that we've given that away, we're looking at this maker movement going, oh, this is so wonderful. We're going to make things again, and we basically gave up that capacity, and so it's almost like we're coming around full circle. And as you talked about earlier in the pre-conference, I pitched this to our principal, and they were excited about it. And that is to bring back a wood shop in the school, and she's absolutely thrilled about it. And I'm pretty excited about it because, I mean, when you work fundamentally with your hands, there's something just primeval about that is just fundamental to all humans, is making things and the satisfaction of making things. And I mean, when you do things, all electronics all the time, the kids are constantly like this, everything's a virtual world for them. In fact, so many of them are absolutely jaded, when it comes to, doing things amazingly with their own capacities and handiwork, because they see things on TV, they see things in movies, they see things in their video games that we don't even have the capacity to do yet. I mean, literally, the technology is beyond us, so that when something amazing is done, they yawn at it. It's just like, oh,
Right. Their grasp of reality is fictional. Right. Yes. I want to back up for a minute and thank you for sharing that. I have known you for some time. We met at the National Science Foundation, probably on the 11th floor, probably the old NSF building. But you mentioned some dates in the late 80s and 90s moving forward. But I would like to know what you were doing before you went to college in your late teens there on the Space Coast, because for our listeners, you are a resident of the Space Coast and have pretty much lived there your entire life. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, sure. My dad came down from Wisconsin. He was a dairy farmer, and he vowed he would never get up at 3 a.m. and milk cows in minus 20 degree weather. And so he came down to Florida, and he couldn't get him to go back. And so he had graduated from DeVry in Chicago. So he was a technician, and he started on the Polaris missile program, and that got into Apollo. And at some point in time, he actually was a command module officer, where they did everything but actually fly the Apollo spacecraft. They did all the testing and check out, and they worked very closely with the astronauts on that. And he didn't get to that status until the Apollo Soyuz program, but so he was a premier electrician. And then when I graduated high school, shuttle was coming on board, and my dad said, hey, there's talk that they're hiring tile techs, you ought to put in for it. So I did. I mean, it was a thermal protection installations mechanic. I know it sounds all highfalutin, but what we did was we licked them and we sticked them. We stuck the tile on the shuttle. And I was probably the youngest hired technician to work for Rockwell doing that. I was 17 years old, and I was working on the shuttle Columbia.
So even then you were doing hands-on work, right? Even that was very manual, right?
Yeah, and we did a lot of things. I kind of had expertise in drawing, and so when tiles would become damaged, we had to disposition them. We had to measure them. We had to define the defect, where it was, how deep it was, where it was located, adjacent tiles and gaps and things like that. And I was quite good at drawing. And so a lot of times I would do drawings for the people, and we interfaced closely with the engineers and got the tiles dispositioned and repaired and whatnot. So yeah, I did that for 2 years before going to college. I mean, I literally, as a 17-year-old, I was making about 25 grand. This is back in the late 70s. I remember when I went to school, I had my taxes done by somebody else, and I was out to school, and the person's looking at me, and they're looking at my taxes, and says, you have a very unusual income for a person your age.
Right.
So I had this opportunity. I could have made that a career like my dad did, but I just there was something in me that just couldn't handle that. I got into teaching. I don't know. I taught when I was worked with the Navajo people on the reservation as a young missionary, and there's something, I don't know, maybe you guys can relate to this, but when you teach somebody something and you see that look of recognition in their face, you just get all tingly, your spine, you just, I feel it now as I'm saying it. And it is a one of a kind type of a feeling. And I realize not everybody's cut out for teaching, but for me, that was just such a cool feeling, and it never goes away. And so I've always loved teaching. So.
Well, I want to go back a little bit to what sounds to me like the VOTEC kind of career education that most of us, well, at least the three of us kind of grew up with. And I laughingly remember my shop experiences, where I'm in there with a group of guys and a few other girls that were kind of required to take it. And I was, did I make something amazing? Nope. But I walked out of there with something. The same was true with agriculture I had to take, and, like some kind of computer typing class, as well as like home economics back in the day. We never see anything like this anymore. And it sounds like you're bringing that back. So for our younger listeners who might not have an understanding of why it's so important to be able to build something, to be able to use tools on your own without having to pay someone to do it, what would you say is really missing in our current focus on education that maybe we should revisit from the past?
Well, it kind of gets back to what I was saying about the virtual world we live in. There's so much missing that's tangible. I mean, you might not have felt very good about, you might not have felt you did this perfect, birdhouse or whatever you happen to be making. I took home ec, and I cooked, and I, did a little bit of sewing. That was a cool thing. I spent the summer working with the people at the parachute refurbishment facility, those parachutes that would bring down the shuttle boosters. There was 3 of them on each booster, so they had to refurbish 6 of those parachutes, and they were 130 feet across. So there are 3 of them. So you're talking about, each one of them weighed about a ton dry. And so you go in there, and literally sewing machines, you see sewing machines, and men and women, didn't matter. They worked side by side, and they were just great seamstresses, if you will, sewing those parachutes back together again. Because what would happen is those parachutes would deploy at about 600 miles per hour, and so that nylon would come shredding out of those packs, and it's just like playing on the carpet and you get a rug burn. That's what would happen, is that nylon would burn because it would come out of the pack so quickly. And so they would have to test the damaged area, and they would use a Tinius Olson pull testing machine and literally just tension it till it popped, like a shotgun going off. And then they would look, and they would examine the fabric, and they would say, this is how much damage it had, and this is how much strength it has. And then they start to build an archive of engineering data to understand, when things were okay to fly, a certain minimum amount of damage, and when it had to actually cut out and repaired. So that, again, we get back to the idea, you might not have thought it was the most amazing thing in the world, but probably at the time you were very proud of yourself because you did it.
Well, not just that. I think like just nowadays as an adult of what I'm not able to do. And most oftentimes it would be something that I know that a parent tried to teach me along the way, like even changing a tire. And I'm willing to just pay somebody, even if painting my house, right? I'll pay someone to paint my house, whereas my brother feels that my grandfather is watching from heaven, like rolling over going, why would you pay anyone to paint your house? These are skills, I think, that ultimately we have gotten used to. And I think education is partly to blame for this, of just letting someone else do it because we're too busy doing something else. And I think that ultimately these kinds of skills, these hands-on applications really lend themselves to the higher level thinking that is needed. And not only that, it makes you more employable in almost every job that you do, because you're able to see things from a different perspective. You're more creative perhaps in your approach. You're able to solve problems that many of us who don't have those skills are able to do.
Sure. And let me add on to her team. I want to ask you, because I know you have some serious strength and skills and experience in team building, small teams, and the engineering design process. So I'd like you to share anything you'd like in sort of that arena of how do you work with small groups and help them accomplish big things?
Well, you model it after industry as much as you can. That's a real big problem. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the next generation science standards that came out, and that was going to be the next greatest thing. And there were all these prescriptions, and it was important, and it was good, and anything we can do to improve our standing, internationally in the science areas is going to be beneficial. But they made some prescriptions for engineering, which were so out of focus and almost deranged, because they were having science teachers, try to teach engineering. And what science teacher knows anything about engineering? All engineers have to go, all engineers have to go through science to get the engineering, but no scientists have to go through engineering to get the science. So the mindset, the engineering mindset is totally different than scientific mindset. So we have to start fundamentally. How's it done in industry? And I think Kevin would agree that when we model model our educational practices by what industry is doing, that is very beneficial. It's very accurate. It's very authentic.
Right.
So much of what we do in education is so far removed from a real world experience that it's almost obscene.
Well, you have people making educational decisions that haven't either been in industry, if it's something related to that. So then you just teachers doing that work. But even more often, there's not even teachers involved in making those decisions. It's political,
Right. And I've always said, you look at the STEM, it's, science, technology, engineering, and math. And, the important parts of that is the T and the E, the technology and the engineering. The ends we know, the science and the math we know. And then you look at most educators, and especially the administrators of education, and they don't understand the technology and the engineering world at all. So there's 50% of STEM that most people that are setting policy don't even understand.
Do you think let me just ask you this. Do you think it's fair to say that they assume that those two content areas, right, are basically like subject areas versus industry? So if you think about what you're saying, engineering and what was the other one? Technology, those are careers. It's different. It's really encompassing an entire industry versus, okay, we've got a textbook here for science and math, and you may, incrementally go, but it's definitely it's a paradigm shift to be able to recognize that if you really want to create the citizens of the future, you have to prepare them for a workforce, not just to pass a test to go on to a college.
Yeah. So the thoughts there. You're right on, because we're gonna write a new textbook and talk about engineering, and we're gonna give them iPads, and that'll satisfy the technology requirement. And that's totally so far removed. It just totally exposes their inability to understand what the intent is. And the idea is, when you're doing engineering activity, you are creating technology. See, so any engineering activity which does not have a product is not engineering activity. You don't just sit there and read about engineering and expect, that to be meaningful for students. And so, and then you show that relationship between the science. The science is about the discovery, and then the discovery is used in like materials and stuff. So you have material science, and then the engineers benefit from that. And then the engineers design something like an optical instrument like Hubble Space Telescope, and that increases scientific exploration, and it just keeps on feeding each other like that. But so when we need to model everything that we do after what's happening in industry, and that just speaks to the need for industry and education to be really closely aligned with one another. But it's like the STEM thing, that's been so funny to watch. The one fellow, I love the quote. He says something like, these subject areas have been, discrete and separated from each other for hundreds of years, and you think a 4-letter word is going to bring them together? Right. So and then you have a lot of people that resent STEM because they're the arts, and then they say, well they're not, so you have STEM, you have STEM R because now we need reading, or stream, because reading's important too. And then we have, STEM C because now we got to, it's just all these things because, STEAM because the arts are important, and that's not the point. The point is that, GNP is created in a nation by invention and by technologies. And that's not to say the arts are important. It's just that when you integrate these subject areas, you get basically what happens in industry.
I read a Henry Ford quote that he said not a single one of his inventions did he not look at with having an eye toward how it could help out mankind. Right. He was very practical in what he wanted to do. I'm sorry, I said Henry Ford, but I meant Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was very focused on the benefit his inventions would bring, how to help mankind. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and to speak back to the arts and stuff, that, again, STEAM is not to be taken away from the arts at all. In fact, if you look at those intersections of engineering and computers and stuff with these other seemingly unrelated areas are where there's a great treasure trove of capacity and invention that is possible. I mean, look at Steve Jobs. I mean, his best class, his favorite class that he took in college was calligraphy.
That's right.
And he took that calligraphy class and he basically made true type fonts on a Macintosh computer. And that revolutionized the computer, at becoming the first desktop publishing. The Macintosh was the go-to computer for desktop publishing because of what Steve Jobs did with respect to the arts and technology. So, it's not to be downplayed whatsoever. It's just that when you integrate those subject areas, you basically have industry. And so, if you're trying to do a good STEAM program, you've got to go back to industry and say, how do you do it?
We met with a former principal recently on a podcast who expressed exactly what you said, that it's integrated across the curriculum. It has to be. And when we talk about putting it all together, it's simply because it's become a funding mechanism, right? So like if you call something STEM, then there's a way to get money, right, versus the idea that it's not exclusionary of every other thing. It's just that within those areas, everything must come together to be a really good education in order for a child to fully see how it fits in everywhere else. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think math has become, the older I get, the more I think of math as simply the language that we must speak in order to do science, engineering, or math. It is the glue that holds it all together. Without math, we're just, beating our heads against rocks in a cave somewhere.
Yeah, that's how you quantify. It's how you quantify results.
Right. So I know for a fact that you have published numerous times. You're a prolific author and content curator. How about share a little bit with our audience some of the things you've enjoyed most creating, either your books or papers, things of that nature, and also point us to where we might find them.
Oh, boy. I know I don't have a repository of something like that. I almost said suppository.
We will leave that in the recording.
Yes. When I had a web page in my former employment, I had all that in a place where I could share it, and a lot of that stuff, the web page was taken down by Brevard County, and so I mean, I had one of the most amazing web pages, back in the day when people didn't make a web page, I had my own, and there was a lot of on-demand training that I provided my students via that web page. And when they took that down, that was a very sad day. But anyway, some of again, talking about intersections, some of my best experiences, I had the most amazing thing happen. I don't know, most men, they have a difficult time dealing with the female side of things, And I remember when I was dating my wife, she took me to a musical, and I always, she blindsided me with this thing. It's like, what is this movie we're going to? Oh, it's called Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. You'll like it. And I, what? I've never seen that before. And when they start singing, I go, oh, you totally set me up. because men don't like stuff like that. That's nonsense. I mean, where's this orchestration coming from in this cornfield? That doesn't make any sense at all. Forget the fact that we have to, suspend physics for Star Wars movies, but but anyway, so I had a total aversion for musical and theater and stuff. And then when I built my house, we designed and built our own custom house here, because I was a poor teacher and I couldn't afford, to buy a big house. And, when our youngest child is sleeping on the floor and his clothing are in boxes under the bed, it's time to get a bigger place. So anyway, we built a house. And when the director of career and technical in Brevard found out that I built my own house, they said they stuck the community college on me and say, hey, get this guy to build your theater sets for you, because he's really good at building stuff. And so I got hired as an adjunct professor at Eastern Florida as a theater theater arts instructor. And I built sets for 5 different plays that were just absolutely amazing. And it was some of the best experience that I ever had, as far as learning, opening up my own horizons and being able to do something that wasn't, in my wheelhouse, as Kevin would say, but
Right.
It turned out to be something quite amazing for me. And I guess I do that as a little bit of diversion, because I know what you asked me about my papers and things like that. But, it's like that, and $5 get you a cup of coffee or, a hot chocolate at Starbucks. People don't care about that. Your principals don't read your resume. They don't read the things that you ever wrote. They don't know what your expertise is. It's like, principals are like children. They don't read your resume. So what good is all that?
That's definitely going into the podcast. So
what good does all that do? If you have this expertise but nobody cares. So
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I've been on a couple panels. Kevin, you've been on panels. I got called to appear at Olin College of Engineering in New York, and I'm sorry, in Boston. I was on a panel at Florida State for 3D printing technologies, and pontificating about what its future is going to hold and how it's going to impact students. I mean, one of the projects we did was with a manufacturer there, here in Brevard County, and they actually build weapons systems, and they wanted to do a partnership with us. And so we said, well, what could we do? Let's build something. Let's make a mold and injection mold something. And the students came up with this idea where they made this picture frame. It was just like a 5x7 picture frame, along the lines of what they might do for, yearbook stuff. They're going to get their pictures and photos and stuff, and they put it in this frame. And we were the Vipers. And so the idea, they had like a Viper motif that they engineered into it, where these little fangs were coming in the corners, so it looked a little snake-like, but it's basically just a plastic picture frame that was injection molded. But the students, to their credit, they engineered it, and they wanted it to be something that could hang on the wall, either vertically or horizontally. So they made provisions for that. And then they said, it should hang in the locker too. So let's make it magnetic. So they made some magnetic catches for it. And then that's not enough. They put a backing on it and said, let's make it so that it can stand up. If you can put it on your desktop. And so they made a little back for it too. And then Knight's Armament, which is the company that I'm talking about, they injection molded it for the students, and they built so many of them. The students got to assemble them, they packaged them, and they sold them. And that is an authentic experience right there.
Right,
Yeah.
right. From ideation to manufacturing.
Right.
Yeah, and of course they tour the facility, so they watch the manufacturing all the way through the process. And I mean, if you don't get a genuine experience from that, nothing's going to give you a genuine experience.
Well, as we're about to close out today, we normally ask kind of a question about general advice. Do you have anything you want to ask before we close it out?
No, I just, I'm all in, I'm in agreement with her about your advice question.
Well, so let's say today you were able to have the ear of those educational politicians, the administrators who are making the decisions. Let's just even keep it as simple as the state of Florida, if not the United States. Give us your best advice for why we should go back to implementing hands-on engineering into a regular everyday classroom?
You mean like more of the manual arts, or what do
Yeah,
you
like
mean?
if you were to give what advice would you have for, let's say, administrators or politicians who have to make decisions about curriculum in regards to engineering education?
Well, we gave up capacity, when we, when we relinquished the idea that we were going to have a community or a population that can work with their hands. This whole maker movement has been just amazing. I love it. I started 3D printing in 2004. I put the first 3D printer in a high school in the state of Florida. And so I've been doing this for a long time. But, you see the pendulum swing back and forth. And, I wrote this amazing article, and I was so proud of myself for writing it. And I shared it with my professor that I was collaborating with at the University of Virginia. And he's kind of just shook his head and says, well, it's just so much tilting at windmills, it's like, nobody's going to listen to you, so, I guess if I was king for the day and I could, do whatever, you should always have people be choosing the technology which is most appropriate. So if the idea is to, do something, do you need a table saw, or do you need a coping saw, or are you going to 3D print it? What are you going to do? The children need to use whatever technology is the most appropriate for what they're going to be doing. If they're going to build a bookcase, that's not going to be 3D printed, so they probably need to use some saws for that. Are they going to go to IKEA and buy it? The Swiss will love that for it. They're, we're buying stuff from them, right? Because, or we're going to get some particle board with some wallpaper on it. Is that what we're going to buy? We're going to buy, some particle board that just has wallpaper, wood grain on it. Is that the sort of quality that we want in our houses? What do you want?
So it seems like there's this, I'm just hearing from you there, and it makes me think a little bit. So the idea of a quality of a product really comes down to the engineering and that technology that you put into it. So what we either make is the equivalent of something that we can show pride in. And I think that there's a big difference, right, in between sometimes what we can just go and buy versus that which we create ourselves.
Well, sure. I always thought it was funny because when people immediately, when they find you have a woodshop program, they have all these projects that they want you to make, but they say, oh yeah, you could have the students build this, but they don't want student quality. They want your quality. So that means, Mr. Portz, you're going to make this for us. So, it's been a little bit of trepidation that I've even considered, bringing back and reviving a wood shop. But I just think it's important for students to be able to do this, be able to do things like that.
Yeah. Well, I have known you, Steve, for over a decade, and I remember the day we met at the old NSF building at the National Science Foundation. I've been privileged to work with you for 5 years, and I appreciate you as a friend, and I know you're very good at what you do, and I hope that our paths are going to keep crossing so that we can keep working on some projects together. So we want to thank you for joining us today for the podcast.
And if it's okay with you, in the links in the description area, I might ask if I can link to some of your material, if there's anything in particular you want me to link to, or if there are particular articles that I would be happy to do.
If you just do Portz and STEM, you'll probably come up with my article. It's a white paper that I wrote for the Space Congress. It's in several academic
I'll link it.
That's
awesome.
probably the best one.
Got
All
it.
right.
I'll look
Well, thank you again, and it's always good to see you, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah. You guys have a great summer.
Thanks.
All right.
Hold on.